I think this is very hard to predict because a lot depends on whether the Israelis go into Gaza with ground forces. There's been a lot of talk about them going into Gaza and tearing the place apart, finding Hamas and eradicating Hamas. But I think the Israelis, this is just a guess, but I think the Israelis have come to realize that this is not a smart idea, that going into Gaza and trying to eliminate Hamas will cause more trouble than it's worth. And then at the end, even if you were to eradicate Hamas, you'll just get a new radicalized group in its place. You're not going to solve the problem with military force. This is a political problem. So one question is, do they go in or do they not go in? But they're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if they don't go in, Hamas lives to fight another day for sure. And they're well armed and they're going to continue to cause problems. Then if they don't go in, they bomb Gaza. But this is a total disaster, not only because from a human point of view, from a human rights point of view, just seeing civilians killed is an absolutely horrible thing, but also it does no good strategically. It doesn't solve the problem. It just enrages people inside the Palestinian world, inside the Arab world, and it even loses support over time for Israel in the West. So bombing is no solution either. So the Israelis are really between a rock and a hard place. I don't know what they do to fix the problem. And this gets back to my earlier point that the solution to this was a two-state solution.
Right. I have to ask you this because you're so well regarded internationally. What would you do if Bibi Netanyahu called you up and says, Professor Mearsheimer, give me your guidance?
Well, I've thought about that question. I would tell him to back off from the bombing as soon as possible and not go further down that road. And I would advise not to go into Gaza. And I would tell him that what he ought to do and what his colleagues ought to do is reverse gear and or reverse direction and move towards a two-state solution. But he's never going to accept that. And he heads up a governing coalition that includes a number of people who are much further to the right than he is. Right. And if you look at the demographics in Israel over time, right, this is a country that's going to get more and more hawkish and more anti-Palestinian over time. That, coupled with the present events, makes it almost impossible to see how you get a two-state solution. So I think I could give him that advice. And even if he were willing to listen to me, which he wouldn't be, he couldn't execute it because the politics inside Israel no longer facilitate a two-state solution. That train has left the station.
Professor John Mearsheimer, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insight and for